Hello those students and welcome to your biology class. Today we'll be looking at the topic blood. Under blood we'll be focusing on the composition of blood, the different types of blood cells, the function of blood itself, and last but not the least, sites where these cells are produced. Now, what is blood? Well, blood is a body fluid that is reddish in color. Its main function is to transport things around the body. We'll look at those things it transports later when we look at the function of blood. So be sure to hang around and reach the end of this lesson. So with that said and done, let's now look at the composition of blood. Composition. Well, what makes blood? Blood is mainly made up of two things: blood plasma, which is the most part of it, and blood cells. The blood plasma is a yellowish fluid found in blood that makes up 55% of blood, while the blood cells are cells found in this blood which we'll look at later, and they make up the remaining part, which is obviously 45%, right? Yes, so blood plasma is a yellowish fluid which forms 55% of blood, and then the blood cells make up 45% of blood. With that said and done, we know a bit about the composition of blood. Now, let's look at the body cells. Since we know what plasma is, now let's look at the blood cells. There are many blood cells found in blood, so we'll look at each of them, but there are mainly three of them: the red blood cell, white blood cell, and the platelets. These are the three types of blood cells in blood. Now, we said blood cells make up 45% of blood. Now, how are these three blood cells distributed in that 45%? Well, red blood cells make up 41% of these blood cells, while the remaining 4% is shared by the white blood cells and the platelets. And this is why mostly the color of blood will be reddish in color, because of the amount or the numerous red blood cells. With that said and done, let's not waste any time. We get into knowing each of these red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. The red blood cells. Red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. So when you see the word erythrocytes, just remember the blood cell being referred to is a red blood cell. Under this part where we're looking at each of these constituents of the blood cells, we'll be looking at the structure, the function, and sometimes the important facts you need to remember about each of these blood cells. Now, let's start with the structure. I'm sure you already know that red blood cells are red in color. So the only thing remaining to be told is actually how they look, right? Yes, so red blood cells are biconcave. So they've got two concave shapes in their shape. They've got two concave shapes in their structure or shape. Later I'll show you a diagram that shows the biconcave shape of a red blood cell. Then the other structure is that red blood cells don't have any nucleus. Instead of a nucleus, they have got hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a fluid found in red blood cells, and it's that fluid that gives red blood cells their reddish color. Now, here are some pictures showing how red blood cells look like. They are just circular. The biconcaveness in shape is really shown after we bisect or we cut one of these red blood cells. let's say we cut the red blood cell through the red line. Yes, and then we could see the inside of a red blood cell, right? Yes. So this is how it will look. As you can see, there are two concave shapes, one on each side. There's one this side and another one on the other side. So this is what they mean when they say biconcave in shape. And as you can see, there are discs. So don't forget there are also discs in shape. Now we look at the function of red blood cells. Well, red blood cells have got one important function, which is transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide across tissues and lungs. They do this by simply using that fluid which is known as hemoglobin. So when the blood goes to the lungs, the carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen. Then that oxygen that gets into the red blood cells will go and get released into the tissues. Then those tissues replace that oxygen with carbon dioxide. And as you can see, there will be a cycle of that exchange. Now, you need to note these important points. One, red blood cells have got a life limit, just like people die and are buried. Yes. So red blood cells that die are taken, then are destroyed or broken down in the liver. So red blood cells contain iron. If you look at more detailed structure, yes. So iron is very important in the production of these red blood cells. So when they are destroyed, that iron won't be lost. It will be stored. Then the remaining things apart from the iron are then used to make bile. So don't forget those 2 points. They are very important. Now we look at the white blood cells. The white blood cells are another kind of blood cells that are in that 4% of the 45% of blood cells found in the body. They are also known as leukocytes, though when you look at a detailed study of white blood cells, they are really complex. There are a lot of names, I tell you. So this term leukocytes is just the collective name for all kinds of white blood cells. So in this lesson, we'll be just focusing on the two common types of white blood cells, which are phagocytes and lymphocytes. We're going to start with phagocytes. Phagocytes are a type of white blood cells that fall under granulocytes. Granulocytes are simply white blood cells that contain granules. So under structure, we obviously know that phagocytes are going to have granules. But before that, let's talk about their shape. Phagocytes are irregular in shape. This is because of their function that we'll later talk about. Then, like I said, they fall under granulocytes, which are white blood cells containing granules. And so they have many granules. Now, what is the function of phagocytes? Well, phagocytes are mainly used to engulf bacteria. So this is why they've got irregular shape. Their shape changes depending on mainly the bacteria they engulf and things like that. Now with that said and done, let's look at the lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are another type of white blood cells. I can say they're like the opposite of phagocytes. So they are in the group of white blood cells that are known as agranulocytes, which don't have granules. So under the structure, we'll know since the phagocytes were irregular, these have a regular shape. So they have a spherical nucleus. and so their shape is also kind of spherical. Then they have got no granules, and so lymphocytes are granulocytes. Then under the function, they've got an important function of secreting antibodies. Antibodies are very helpful to fight bacteria. This is because sometimes phagocytes may not know which bodies to engulf, but the lymphocytes or their granulocytes, the white blood cells that fall under granulocytes, make it possible for attacking even those bacteria that the phagocytes cannot attack easily. Now let's look at how the phagocytes look like. So the picture that has just been shown here shows a cell that represents the phagocytes. As you can see, it's irregular in shape. It has got many granules. The granules are those small structures we can see. Then we also have the structure of a lymphocyte. You can see its nucleus is spherical, and we can see that its cell membrane is at least regular. So this is not the exact way a lymphocyte looks like. It's just a diagrammatic representation of how a lymphocyte looks like. So with that said and done, now let's look at the last type of blood cells. I'm sure you've been waiting for them. These are no other than platelets. Platelets are also very important as they play an important role to prevent excess blood loss. So remember, when we talk about functions, this will be one of the functions. They're also known as thrombocytes. And now let's look at their structure. So the structure of platelets is plate-like. I'm sure that's why they got the name platelets. They are plate-like, although they don't really or exactly resemble a plate, but yes, their structure looks like a plate. When we see how they look, you agree with me. Then the other thing is that platelets have got no nucleus. But what makes them special is that their bodies are sticky, right? So they can be able to stick to one another. And so they can prevent blood going out, or they can prevent excess blood being lost. And so now we go to their function. Been repeating one of their function, preventing excess blood loss. Yes, so they're essential in blood clotting. So the process of blood clotting is simply when blood is prevented to escape the body. I'm sure we've all hurt ourselves once. Yes, when you hurt your skin, after some time you notice that the bleeding will stop, and you start noticing that on the sore that remains, there will be some clot that will be formed. And later you'll find that there will be some black structures that will form. So that's all a result of blood clotting, and those are platelets that play that role. Another function is that they prevent loss of blood components. I'm sure now you know blood contains blood plasma and blood cells, and in the blood cells that are found there are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, right? So when blood keeps on coming out of the body, we will lose red blood cells and white blood cells. And we know the function of red blood cells and white blood cells. So the body will start being at risk. And so platelets are very important. The diagram here shows some resting platelets on the left. Then on the right, you can see some activated platelets. So activated platelets are just platelets that have been involved in the process of clotting. As you can see, they've been like meshed up, forming something like a net. But when they are resting, you can see they are plate-like structures, right? Yes. Now, you must also note the following point. Platelets are destroyed in the liver and spleen after they have been around or they've been working for 5 to 9 days in the body. I'm sure you agree with me, it's not every day we hate ourselves, right? So platelets need to be destroyed, or else maybe in the body they might stick together and prevent the blood flow. With that said and done, now let's look at sites. Or before we look at the sites, let's look at the function of blood, so that the sites will be the last part. Yes, so what are the functions of blood? Well, the functions of blood can be gotten from the individual components that are found in it. So I'm sure you agree with me that blood is a transport medium. It's used to transport nutrients and oxygen to tissues, while it is also used to transport carbon dioxide from tissues to the lungs. Most of this function is made possible by the presence of red blood cells. Then the other function is that the blood acts as a defensive against infection. It's a defensive mechanism that's used to protect the body from infection. White blood cells, you agree with me, are directly linked to this function. Then the other two functions will just be additional knowledge about the functions of blood. The third one is that they transport heat throughout the body. I'm sure there are sometimes it gets cold, so blood is a fluid that enables equal distribution through the body of an organism. Then last but not the least, blood transports hormones and nitrogenous waste. The nitrogenous waste transported by the blood is usually from the liver, and it helps this nitrogenous waste to get to the kidneys. With that said and done, now let's look at the sites where blood is produced. Blood is produced mainly in the bone marrow. Sites of blood production. They incorporate the blood cells in blood. So under this part, we'll be looking at where these blood cells are produced from or made from. The first ones we're going to look at are the red blood cells. The red blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, specifically the red bone marrow, where the multipotent stem cell is used to make more red blood cells. This happens through the process of cell division, differentiation, and many other processes for red blood cells to multiply. The hormones from the liver and kidney influence this process of making blood cells. Most processes in the body you will notice are influenced by hormones. Then now we have the white blood cells. White blood cells are also made in the bone marrow from the same cell, which is the multipotent stem cell. Though some, like lymphocytes, are made from lymph nodes and the spleen, while The T cells are made in the thymus gland. Lastly, let's look at the platelets. Platelets are just like all the other blood cells. They are also made from bone marrow. So as you can see, all these three blood cells are made from the multipotent stem cell. So it's easy to remember. Then some white blood cells are made from the lymph nodes and spleen, while the T cells are made in the thymus gland. So that's all for today's lesson, and thanks for being part. Look out for another video which will be covering more under blood.